možné pěstovat zemědělské plodiny a zároveň zlepšovat kvalitu půdy? Může být zemědělská produkce různorodá, ekonomicky životaschopná a přitom ještě podporovat biodiverzitu? Nejen nad tím se zamyslíme spolu se zemědělci, vědci a s dalšími experty z Česka i ze zahraničí. Audiosérii vás provede Lenka Ernbergerová z Českého spolku pro agrolesnictví.
Hi, today we have here Adolfo Rosati from Italy, who is a researcher and also farmer in agroforestry, and he will tell us his story. My first question, you are very active in agroforestry. Can you tell us how you got into this field?
Yes, of course. This could be a long story, but I'll try to be short. Basically, as far back as I remember when I was 2 or 3, if you asked me what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a farmer. And as I studied agriculture in high school and university, most things that they taught me did not apply to the farm I had in mind, because I had in mind a farm in the mountains, in the marginal areas of Italy, and studying how to plant corn just did not fit. I thought, I can never make a living planting corn in small fields with a steep slope where the machinery cannot go. I have to do something else. Also, I was going to the countryside on weekends, and I didn't have time there to be every day, so I realized that permanent crops like trees, actually, you don't have to plant them every year. It's a lot less work. And if you find the right tree that does well in the right place, maybe you don't have to do much pruning or much fertilizing or spraying. So just getting the right tree or any other permanent crops was probably a better fit for my environment and for my time availability. And so I started planting trees. I started planting trees on my very first field when I was 20, because I didn't have a family farm, so I had to buy my own field. And because I didn't have money to buy fields, I had to find another job. So I thought research would be the great fit, because I could have a job that would give me some money, but also teach me something good that I would put in practice in my farm. So I started planting trees, and I realized, well, olive trees will take 20 years before they fill the space. That's a waste of space. I only have one tiny field. What can I put between the olives? So I put a bush, some kind of bush that would have a lifespan of 10 years, 15 years, so that by the time the olive is big, the bush is turnover is done, and I can get 2 things in the meantime. And what can I put underneath the bush in the meantime? Well, even the bush will take 2 or 3 years. What can I use the space for? And much later, I realized somebody called this agroforestry. Somebody else called this permaculture, and I was doing all of that without giving it a name. And in fact, I must confess, I'm not a big fan of names. I like agroforestry, maybe I like permaculture, but to me that's agriculture, that's intelligent agriculture, that's more sustainable agriculture. Anything good and smart and practically viable that comes out anywhere, I'm happy to implement in my farm, give it whatever name you want. I do find that agroforestry has a lot of things I find useful, so it's one of the things I follow more closely, but it's not like agroforestry is the goal. Agroforestry is a tool, like many other tools, to achieve your goal, which is have a farm that's sustainable both environmentally and economically, and also spiritually, in the sense that it fits your own goal as a person. So these 3 elements are your goal, and agroforestry is one of the tools. So to conclude my story, once I stumbled into research, I liked it. I worked on different kinds of things, ecophysiology, but then I realized I really, as a researcher, would like to give a contribution that's more practical for farmers. And I started working with agroforestry design. So in the meantime, eventually I was able to open a farm with my wife, and she's the farmer, I'm the helper when I'm home, of course, because I have another job. And so that's where I got to be a researcher and a farmer and dealing with agroforestry.
Oh, great. So it's nice that you can put together these 2 things, farming and research.
Yes.
So maybe first, if you can describe us a little bit your agroforestry farm.
The main goal for us is to produce as many things as we can for our own consumption, because then we can live in a nice environment, clean environment, and eat healthy food that we can grow. I also think that in the past they taught us that economically it did not make sense to have a to aim for self-sufficiency because you needed to specialize, to buy the machines, to produce only one thing on the large scale. That was the only way to be competitive. In fact, most farmers nowadays don't eat anything from the farm, because even if they're milk farmers, they will sell the milk to the company and buy the milk in a bag. Same thing if they're producing oil or wine or whatever. But we've come to a point that actually things are so expensive to buy as a final consumer that a family of four, like in my case, could easily spend half of one stipend just buying food. In these conditions, I actually find that in a farm where there is 4 people, aiming for some sort of self-sufficiency in food is actually economically quite interesting, because otherwise, it would still cost you. It's a big earning to not have to buy food, aside from non-producing packaging and all those things. So we aim for a enlarged self-consumption, which also includes guests, because we have a small agriturismo. So the guests come and they can eat our own food while they're there. We also have visiting students and groups, and they can also eat our produce. And when we have access, then we have a WhatsApp group. So we send a message and send out a list of what there is, and then we sell the access in this way. I must admit that the main limit to farming in this different way is bureaucracy, because when you do many little things, you multiply by as many times the number of papers you have to do. And just now in Italy they're implementing a new rule where the farmer is required to put phenology into a common database. Now, if you grow corn and you have to say, today I seeded, today it's flowering, today I fertilized, that's doable. Imagine when you have 70 crops. It's impossible. So I think these rules are really what's killing any sustainable project. So I wish policymakers realize that sustainability means diversity, and diversity means complications, and you cannot ask somebody with 70 crops the same paperwork as one crop. So we need minimum levels under which you get rid of the paper, otherwise sustainability is not going to happen. It's just not possible. But anyway, we have 50 hectares. We grow some grapes, mostly for grape juice rather than wine, because wine is a big business we don't want to enter with. We produce our own olive oil, so we have 70 productive trees, but then 300 more trees. They're more landscape feature than other. We have a lot of forest. We have a couple of cows. My wife into cheese making, so she makes all sort of blue cheese and camembert and feta and scamorza and mozzarella, you name it, but only when the cow is milking, which is not always. We have some sheep that clean the orchard clean. We have a collection of maybe 1,500 varieties of fruit trees, 450 varieties of apples, and then pears and figs, and then jujubes and quinces and pomegranates and everything under the sun that we find that could produce something. Our aim is to test everything so that after our generation, somebody else coming after us will know what grows well in our area and can use this information. So in a marginal area, you cannot farm a large-scale anonymous product because you would never compete with anyone else. You absolutely have to work on added value. Added value means your tomato is special because it has a story. Your tomato is special because it's a variety the customer has never seen before. Your tomato is special because it has a low environmental impact. And you have to sell it to the final consumer who's willing to buy the tomato with its story. Because an anonymous product on a large-scale market, you can't compete with farms of 2,000 acres in Australia or in California or in China or whatever that is. So people are hungry for added value. They like the story. They like to know that there's an environmental attention behind that and a lower environmental impact. That people are ready for this, especially in Europe. That's really the only way to make a living.
Yeah, I think that this is really inspirative also for our farmers. more focused on diversification?
I've been in Brno for a few days, and I noticed that it's actually quite hard to find fresh quality produce like fruits and vegetables. There's a lot of industrial prepackaged, pre-made food. My guess is that consumer would jump into the opportunity to have more availability of fresh, delicious products. I see that many things arrive from outside, so they have a long shelf life, and by the time you buy your carrots here, they're not delicious. If you ever tasted delicious carrots, you never go back to others. So I'm sure there is room for people to produce more local fruits and vegetables, and that customers would jump into it. That's my impression.
Yeah. Okay. And I heard that you have an interesting management technique for growing asparagus and raising chickens and sheep. Could you explain this technique to us? Because it seems really interesting and...
Absolutely. So I mentioned that when I got into research, I did some ecophysiology, but then I wanted to do something more practical that could help farmers better. And being a farmer myself, I know what it means to be practical, to do something that's useful for farmers. So I had olives, and I noticed that wild asparagus grew naturally under the olives. Wild asparagus were not cultivated, but they have a market. They are sold regularly in markets, and people pay, and they're expensive because they're hard to find, and because they're not available in a field, you have to walk around the forest to find them, so they're expensive. So I thought, if this product sells and nobody's growing, why don't I try to grow it? And so I studied how to germinate the seeds. The seeds were dormant, so I figured out how to break the dormancy, how to make the plants. And because they grow naturally under the olives, I thought if I plant them under the trees, I can get a second crop of the tree. And it seems to be where they want to grow naturally, so perhaps that's the best crop to grow under the trees. The trees don't suffer because they are above, the light is all for them, but the asparagus adapted to some shade. So I realized you could get two crops out of one field. The problem is that when you plant asparagus in the field, it's true you produce more on the same piece of land, but you also have now 1 hectare of olives and 1 hectare of asparagus. And 1 hectare of asparagus, it's a lot of work because it's 1 hectare of vegetables, and you have to weed them to keep them reasonably weed free, otherwise you can't get a crop out of them, and that's a lot of work. And so I figure, how can I not do the work myself? And that's where the chickens came in. The chickens can destroy any kind of vegetation, but the asparagus is like a prickly plant, almost like a bush, and once the asparagus is an adult, the chicken won't touch it because it's a prickly plant, it's a hard plant. And so I figured they could do the job. And so we came up with this project. It was at that point part of my research work, and we put together wild asparagus, olives, and chickens, 1,000 chickens per hectare, a meat cycle of 100 days, twice a year. You can put the chickens and the asparagus in the spring, that's when the grass grows, and then once the chickens clean it up beautifully, then the summer you don't need it because there's no vegetation growth because of the drought. And then in the fall, the grass grows again, you do a second cycle. And so with these 2 cycles, you control the weeds in spring and fall when you have a weed problem, and create a sanitary vacuum in the summer and the winter, so that you rest the soil and parasites have time to die before you do another chicken cycle. This way you keep the chickens healthy, you keep the vegetation at bay. By feeding the chickens, you're fertilizing your field, because feed comes out of the other end, and we calculated that 2 chicken cycles of 1,000 birds per hectare will provide like 180 kilograms of nitrogen, which is, even more than you need on an olive crop. So basically, by feeding the chickens and keeping them in the field, you're not fertilizing the field and you're not weeding the field. And it turns out, with a life cycle assessment study that we did, that weeding the field and fertilizing the fields are the 2 operations that are most environmentally expensive. The biggest impact of growing olives is nitrogen fertilization and weeding. And if the chickens do it for you, basically you're drastically reducing the environmental impact of growing olives. You're also reducing the costs because you're reducing time, gasoline, money, tractoring, hand labor. Of course, you have to deal with chickens. And that's the tricky part, because not everybody is willing to engage into a new business with animals. Animals need care every day, but most importantly, animals need a market. If you got 2,000 chickens per hectare every year, it's too little to do economy of scale for butchering, for facilities. If you don't have a butchering facilities near you, it will cost you more than the chicken is worth to take the chickens to the butchering place. So these are a little bit of the practical aspect. But I can imagine that people can cooperate. This is happening with sheep, where sheep shepherds will bring their herds into the olive field of a neighbor farmer. So the olive farmer remains an olive farmer, does not have to deal with the animals, but the shepherd has a field where to bring the animals. So I see this collaboration starting to happen.
And chickens, do you have chickens for meat or for egg production?
In our case, we use meat cycles, because the meat cycle, usually with chickens that graze outside, is about 90 days of grazing, plus you put the chicks out when they're a month old, so that's about it's about 120 days cycles, but they graze for 90 days, and then you don't have to deal with animals, and you don't need the animals weeding because it's summer or winter. Of course, you can do egg too, but then you have the animals 365 days a year, so you don't get a break. And also then you have to more carefully rotate the animals so that you still create that vacuum where you don't graze them for a while and allow the grass to grow. With the meat ones, you don't need to be as careful about rotation because you're rotating in time. With egg ones, there's no time rotation because they're there 365 days, so you have to do more spatial rotation, rotate in the space more carefully. But yes, you can absolutely do it with the one. Sheep are a lot easier, of course, but they will eat the olive trees higher, so you have to prune so that they will clean up to a meter the vegetation, and then you'll have to move a little bit higher up your canopy. And if you do that, then sheep are great because they can clean the field and be out, and then you're done, and you're more likely to find a collaboration with a shepherd that brings your sheep in the field rather than with the chick farmers who doesn't move around chickens as easily as sheep. So, but I mean, all these things depend on the local situation. So you have to look at your situation, your neighbors, your markets, your goals, and come up with a system that suits your design best. But the principle is the animal can be your free worker. It works 24 hours a day. It works 7 days a week. Doesn't have unions, doesn't have complaints. And the nice thing, they're happy to do it because they'd rather be outdoors scratching the soil than be indoor with no space. So you're not exploiting them in any bad way. You're actually allowing them to do what they love doing. So if you can realize what each animal can do, you could use them as workers, free workers for your land. So that's a little bit the principle. Of course, it's challenging. I'm not saying it's easy, but if you start looking around with this, with this seed in your brain, this seed might germinate into something that works for you and can help you reduce costs and produce more sustainably in your field.
Yeah, this is nice point of view. And you tell us that you have your research on your farm also. So can you explain us a little bit more about what are you doing in your research and maybe some results that can help to farmers?
Yes, my research is about ecophysiology, so how the plants uses the nitrogen, the light to make photosynthesis. When I started to work on agroforestry, I moved my ecophysiology into the relationship between tree and crop. So among the things I study is light utilization by polycultural seed crop, where you have the trees and the plants below, but how much light are the plants getting? Is there light enough for those plants? What plants could produce in what light? Could you plant a diversified crop situation below the trees so that you put the right crop in the right shade, because shade is not uniform under the trees. Under the trees there is more shade than in between rows of trees. Should we plant different crops there? Should we plant some permanent crops under the trees because you're not going to be able to till the soil, and some annual crops in between? How can you optimize the natural resources, light, water, nutrients, with trees and crops below? So that's a little bit my approach to the research. So the light is part of my studies, but I try to look at the whole system from the point of view all the nutrients and the elements for which the plants compete: nitrogen, light, water. For instance, I'm studying cover crops that fix nitrogen. What cover crops grow best, in the sense that they don't reduce the yield of the top tree while producing forage below, and at the same time also fixing the nitrogen, so you're saving the nitrogen fertilization, because you want to avoid competition for water and nutrients, otherwise your tree crop will produce less, but you still want to optimize what you get out of the understory crop. So if you don't optimize it, you risk going towards competition and diminishing the tree crop production. So we want to not do that and yet get as much as we can out of the understory crop. So that's what I'm trying to contribute most.
Interesting. So, other question: how do you market the products from your farm?
So we have been experimenting different ways of doing that. Initially, we would provide a weekly basket of produce, but we found that customers that were willing to pay for high quality food, let me say it, spoiled customers, in the sense that they're willing to pay for high quality fresh local food, but they want what they want, and so they're not always happy with receiving more than they want or things that they don't choose. So they want to pick and choose, and so we found that there was more demand for freedom of having whatever they want. So we then organized a WhatsApp group where we put on WhatsApp what there is. The group is a little wider than we need, but that way, first come, first serve. They take what there is, and when it's over, you just can't deliver. So that stimulates them to buy them. If they can choose, but they have to be fast. And so that works out pretty well. We found, and people would just order whatever. We would pre-package the material the day before. Like we send out a list before the weekend. People can have until, say, Monday night to order. Then on Tuesday we prepare, and on Wednesday we deliver to one point in town, and people come up and they order already packaged for them. It's a little bit more of a headache because everybody wants different things. It's a lot easier to make boxes that are all the same, but on the other hand, people are happier that way, and they're willing also to pay extra to get just what they want. So we find that as a convenient way, like what a WhatsApp group or whatever social media you may use is really useful.
Yes, it seems like a really simple way how to use the social media to commercialize the products.
Yes. Social media is an imperative. That's how people operate nowadays. And you have to go through that to reach people. Otherwise, you will be invisible. Essentially, you don't exist if you're not visible on social media. So, and we're talking about added value. If you have a small farm, you were talking about added value. You cannot compete with larger farms on staple crops. So you have to work on service and high quality value. That's the only way to survive as a small scale farmer or a diversified farmer. And social media is where you can be seen by everybody else. Otherwise, you don't exist.
And it's not so difficult to do it.
Right, it's not so difficult. I mean, a WhatsApp group is something everybody can do.
Okay. And do you have any recommendations or warnings for Czech farmers who are thinking of establishing an agroforestry system or agroforestry farm?
So I come from a different country with different climates and different rules, so probably I cannot provide particularly useful details on farming. So what I can suggest is some general approach guidelines. And so I would say, well, first of all, depends if you already have a farm or if you have to buy one. Because if you have to buy one, then you have to carefully choose the location, are you close, and what you want to do. So you buy a place that's located in a suitable place. Like if you want to sell a variety of products to a WhatsApp group, you need to be close to your market. If you have to drive an hour to deliver a small amount of food, it might not be convenient. So a proximity of a village or a town big enough to absorb all your products is essential. if you're further away, then maybe you have to think of produce that doesn't have to be fresh periodically, but maybe something that consumers can buy and store easily, like, I don't know, wine. You can buy a lot of wine and it will keep in your house, but if you want fresh lettuce, you have to buy it fresh, and it has to be delivered, a couple of times a week at least, and then you need to be closer to your market. As I mentioned before, agroforestry is not the goal. Agroforestry is the tool. So agroforestry might work for you, it might allow you to diversify, might allow you to protect your soil from erosion, but you want it also to produce something useful. And so fruit trees are probably preferable to wood, like a forestry species for wood production. Although you can consider forestry species if you need the trees for a service, and in which case you're willing to invest in trees just because you need to shade your animals or shade your crops or prevent soil erosion or provide natural enemies for pest control, and you are ready to take the risk that if in the long run the market will change and you will never cut your trees for wood, it doesn't matter. So in that case you can play that game, and if in 50 years the market is great and your children are still on your farm, maybe you had an investment, but if that doesn't happen, it was still worthwhile for you to plant the trees. Planting the trees because you really budget in your business selling the wood in 70 years is probably not advisable, because who knows if your children will take your farm or if the market will be there in 70 years. The other advice would be observe a lot and do a little bit at a time. If you have a lot of enthusiasm, typical of young people, don't overdo yourself, don't do too much, do a little bit and wait, especially do things, maybe you do a lot of things but on a small scale, so that you immediately start getting experience on the different things you want to do, but everything on a very small scale, so that a year later you know something's not going to work and you haven't invested too much in that thing. Be patient, observe, and move slowly so that you don't burn out yourself, and you will make mistakes, but the mistakes won't be too costly. If you are not a farmer, you're looking into becoming a farmer, it will take one generation to become good at it. So don't give up, but don't over expect. You need to work hard, but also work smartly, otherwise you burn out both physically and economically. So move slowly and test your markets, and then let the thing grow with your experience slowly and with your customers slowly. That would be my main suggestions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you. I hope that our farmers can use your advices, yeah. And they will establish a lot of agroforestry systems here. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck to everyone.